Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to another EVE Online video. In today's video I want to take a look at the July status update from CCP. This is a news article that they released and that I think a lot of us have been waiting on for a pretty long time. Finally, CCP is communicating about their future plans for the game and starting to lift the curtains on what's going to happen after the scarcity phase, which well, we've all been in for over a year at this point, like around 1.5 years or something like that. And it's become definitely a completely different game from before, but all of us are curious as to where are we going next. And so finally we are getting that communication, so I thought it would be interesting to take a look at that. Maybe also speculate a little bit on what some of it may mean, because we are of course going to be pretty light on details. As always, if you want to read this article for yourself, and I actually highly recommend that you do, you can go to eveonline.com, you click on the news link, which brings you to the website where all of the news posts, dev blogs and all of that good stuff is gathered, and then you can find EVE Online, the July status update, which brings us to the article itself. And I'm not going to read through the whole thing, it's actually a pretty long article, so there is definitely a lot of information. Also, a big part of it is also, I'll be honest, regurgitating some of the changes that they have already made. But let's get started. And first of all, the introduction here is something that I hadn't thought about myself, but I did also feel like communication was lacking from CCP. Something that I personally like to do is take in some of the information and announcements that CCP makes and try to incorporate that into EVE Talk, which is the weekly look at the market in EVE Online that I make. And well, let's say in the last couple of months I had next to nothing to report on except for the balance changes and the individual patches that CCP has been doing. But one of the main reasons why I think all feel like communication is lacking at the moment is of course because we are missing FanFest, a yearly gathering where players would have a chance to go to Iceland, and CCP would also of course live stream the whole event. Lots of player interaction, lots of news that would come out there, presentations from CCP themselves on what they're working on, what they've done, giving us a lot of information. We'd usually get a nice trailer as well, building up some hype and making us excited for CCP's plans for the game. And you know, it would always give us a little bit of an idea as to what they're thinking, what they're working on, what the roadmap is for the game. And well, without FanFest, it's kind of normal that we all feel like we are lacking in this information, and that there is like no real hype building happening from CCP. But I think this is not something that only EVE Online struggles with. I would say that the whole game industry and perhaps even the whole economy in general at the moment is suffering from that, because of course of the real life situation that we all find ourselves in. So let's hope that all of that starts to finally get settled, but well, that always remains a big unknown, of course. On to EVE Online itself, where CCP here starts with a little bit of a recap as to what they're focusing on and what they have been focusing on for the last couple of years. I would say that they've always been pretty transparent with that. Number one on their priority list is still player retention. Getting new players into the game is very difficult for EVE Online. It is one of the most complex games out there. It's a true sandbox, so a very niche type of game. And while a lot of people are very interested in playing in EVE Online itself, right? They come into contact with the game when there's massive battles, when there's cool stuff, big heists, thefts and things like that happen. A lot of players have heard about EVE Online, but actually starting the game and then finding your way in EVE Online is actually very difficult. And this despite the fact that I would say the player base in general is very supportive of new players. We have lots of corporations, alliances, structures that are set in place to to support new players, to help them find their way into the game. You can get into nullsec on day one if you really want to. There's a lot of newbie friendly corporations that are willing to help you out there, but it's still a very big step to take, and it's not difficult, not easy for a lot of players to actually take those steps and find their ways into the game and find their place in the sandbox, which doesn't necessarily mean joining a very big nullsec alliance or trying to get into capital ships. It can really be almost anything, but that I think is part of why it's so daunting for a lot of players. Most games out there gives you very clear directions as to what to do. In EVE Online, it's still a sandbox, and so you're basically dumped in there, and finding your way is all a part of that process. And so CCP here reiterating that is definitely one of their major focuses, getting new players not just to try the game, to hear about the game, but then to stick around is what's very difficult. And then the second thing, which is of course why all of us have been waiting and being so hungry for any information, is the healthy ecosystem, where CCP announced like 1.5 years ago that we would be going through the scarcity, the shortage phase in EVE Online. And I think at this point, most of us are starting to feel like we should start to hit bottom at this point. Perhaps it's time to start to think about turning things around and allowing players to have more stuff to do rather than continuously nerfing stuff, especially on the resource front, ISK front as well, with the dynamic bounty system, for instance, very punishing for ratting. When are we going to hit the bottom of this shortage phase? And it looks like finally CCP is starting to be happy with where stockpiles are at. And so down here for the economy and industry, CCP is announcing that scarcity is ending in the fourth quarter of 2021. So in the last quarter of this year, with additional resources as well as player choice for what resources to distribute in your sovereign space will come into the game. Again, as expected, they won't go into details here, but here are some of the things that they're working on. Increased quantity of all resources across New Eden. This is kind of interesting to me, and I'm going to speculate on this one for just a little bit. I've also mentioned this in my last EVE talk. I do sort of expect that the current bottom, you could say, in this scarcity phase will like become a bit of a baseline, and that they'll then build on top of that. And my expectation, my hope as well a little bit, is that it'll then become like a dynamic layer on top of the scarcity bottom, so that it is then possible for someone, for instance, in sovereignty space, to decide that sure, we can increase the amount that can be mined within our space, but that this doesn't remain static, right? It's not boom, we've done the upgrades, that's it, from now on we get that increased yield for eternity. No, there's also like a dynamic system in there that is going to eventually maybe push those resources to the fringes, and then eventually they'll either disappear or maybe get pushed just outside of your sovereignty or something like that. Not sure, of course, what CCP is planning to do, but that's my hope, that we get this baseline so that you can always fall back on like the current minimum, you could say, of what's available in any space, but that then you build on a dynamic system for pretty much all resources that can then, be influenced by the players, but also can't be maintained indefinitely either. Introduction of moon goo and gas compression. I think that this will come together with a balance pass on mining ships. Very important one here. I do believe that maybe they'll work a little bit on gas mining specialized chips. Same thing with perhaps even moon goo specialized chips. They're also going to add special cargo holds for gas and ice. So they're definitely working on that. My one personal hope is, of course, that they don't nerf the mining capability of the Orca into the ground. I don't think it's completely out of line. And I say this anytime they're talking about changing mining ships, is that for me, I still view that as a very nice end game goal, you could say, or goal for high-sec miners to shoot for. It is really the ship where you don't get the best yield, but in high-sec you do end up with that capital class mining ship. You've got mining drones that do all the work for you, and you're big and bulky, so the chances that you'll come across a suicide gank at that point become a lot less, and it already has a lot of very useful attributes to it. It does become potentially your mobile volatile base for a solo-minded high-sec player. I, for instance, can very easily get an exploration ship in there, maybe even a couple of frigates as well to take a look at wormholes and things like that, and then I can just live from my Orca, and that can also always function as my mining ship as well. There's a reason to fly that Orca into the belt, even if I'm solo, even if it's not the very best yield. It's so big that it's very difficult to set up a gank for that one unnoticed. And so I hope that they basically don't make it so that the Orca becomes useless for mining. But we'll have to see, of course, on what CCP is going to do exactly. Expect, in my opinion, big changes to come from all of that. What the exact potential and goal of that is going to be: lower potential mining yields, higher potential mining yields, or more of a shift. That is really the question, I think. And then a rework of the industrial index, including greater choice over the distribution of resources. I'm not sure what that means. I think the industrial index exists in all systems, not just in nullsec. So we'll have to see exactly how these levers are going to work and what the players can influence. More stuff coming as well. So this is, the first announcement, and they're just lifting the veil at this point. They're also mentioning the update to the encounter surveillance system, where of course 20 trillion ISK is set to potentially find its way into the game as the reserve bank keys will become available in low sec. Kind of like that attempt to, you gotta go into low sec, do some difficult content there, you find your key, then go into nullsec, so that it's not just the nullsec local residents. There's the reserve banks that can just organize themselves on a, I don't know what the schedule would be, weekly, daily, monthly basis, and then just empty out their own reserve banks. You have to at least get into low sec in order to get those keys in a completely different region, which is in line with CCP's 180 that they have done together with the announcement of the resource scarcity phase, that they don't want a single area of space to be completely self-reliable and able to do everything. So that's coming as well. It's actually on CC, if I'm not mistaken. Planned updates for existing nullsec anomalies. Very interesting, of course. What's been hit the hardest in the resource nerfs? It has been the nullsec anomaly. I think they've probably been hit like half a dozen times with reductions in numbers, in availability, respawn rates, all of that stuff. So they're planning updates on that. That should be on the up then for the potential, including the addition of capital anomalies, a new higher reward nullsec PvE feature to get capitals back into space, to trigger exciting player escalations, and also is also being worked on. So that one will always be very difficult to actually balance, I think, because especially now that they are so expensive, you will have to make these anomalies very rewarding. And then, of course, player organization may just throw a wrench in the plans of getting this to also trigger like hunting parties and potential conflict, because, of course, the players will do anything and everything that they can to keep these anomalies safe and to be able to basically farm them to their maximum potential. So here again, maybe a dynamic system in these anomalies could be something that's actually very important. So details on that coming later as well. Then we've got balance and progression, which is maybe like the third pillar, right? First player retention. Then we've got the ecosystem with the resource crunch. And here we've got balance and progression, which is something that I think CCP has done a much better job of lately, coming out with updates. Now, sometimes they actually rush them as well. There was one update that was like way too fast that it found its way on DQ. We didn't really get any time on CC, no mass test when it really could have used one, but right after that they did organize a mass test for the next one. So overall, I think CCP is getting into that iteration pace that's very, very high, and so they are changing things quite often. For instance, lately also buffing the Edencom ships, which has caused me to change my skill plan as well. I'm trying to get into those. Already got the Skybreaker basically almost fully trained, and it's definitely pretty fun, but I'm looking forward to the cruiser and then eventually the battleship as well, to see what I can find those ships to do. Let's see what's next here. Big leaps around the balance around capital escalations with changes to sinos and umbrellas. This is, I would say, very important. The current risk versus reward for putting valuable assets in space is off and it needs work. New types of objectives are being looked at to get big ships back on the grid so that there will be something to hunt for and fight over. So this is definitely interesting, but it also, to me, feels like this is still very much at the very beginning of development. They're thinking about ways as to how they can get capital ships back out there into space. And at the moment, no one is even building them because their current price is below production cost. And this is, of course, the hardest thing I think that they are trying to change with the resource crunch. That is the capital proliferation. But the reality is that has been allowed to play out for a very long time, which means that there are huge numbers of these capital ships just out there in nullsec as well. Very little reason at the moment to risk them, to fly them, to use them and lose them. No risk, no real incentive to build a lot of them. There's only, I think, the most dedicated groups that are looking at the even longer future for EVE Online that are at the moment trying to build up these types of ships and finding the right balance between incentivizing players to go out there despite how much harder it is to replace them at the moment. It's going to be a very, very difficult exercise to do. After that, there's a little bit on the Bogvin region, which I would say indeed has been plagued by something that CCP is actually known for a little bit in EVE Online. That is, start very cool with a story, get a new feature, and then unfortunately abandon it a little bit and not iterate on it enough to really keep it alive. And that's something that Bogvin has definitely struggled with for a little bit. Apparently, they changed it so that the entire region is now accessible once you get in there, which has doubled the amount of players that have found their way into the Bogvin region. They are also going to work on more iterations here. I think I read a post from here, the seagulling is being cleaned up, where different sides in the conflict, so the Triglavians and Edencom, are going to now mostly focus on different areas of a system so that you can actually try to take advantage of your standings if you end up in a PvP fight in Bogvin. So you get like basically a retreat to a certain area of space, let's say planets that could be dominated by Edencom. Well, if you're in trouble, go back to a planet. There's a high chance that there's Edencom forces there that will help you out if you're Edencom positive, of course. And then the opposite could be true. Not really sure. Maybe it's like stations, right? It is Triglavian space. That's where Triglavian forces are usually going to be. So if you're outnumbered as a Trig fleet, then retreat is over there. It's not a guarantee, of course, but overall that could be pretty interesting. I really should try to find my way into Bogvin and take a look around there. I'm still fully neutral, not having really interacted with that type of stuff. After that, back to player retention, CCP launching the EVE Academy. To me, this is actually interesting, not just from the EVE Online perspective, but just the general gaming perspective. Very interesting times, I would say, for gaming, and this part, getting your game out there, getting players to find out about your game, to learn about your game, is very difficult for companies at the moment. I would say that we just saw with what Asmongold has done for Final Fantasy XIV, even managing to get so many players interested in that game that they ran out of digital keys for people that wanted to try the game because of his stream that had like 200,000 viewers or something like that at the peak. Crazy times. And so also something that, well, while CCP is of course doing their best and putting a lot of resources in trying to get that player retention to be higher, it is a very difficult proposition in the current gaming landscape where, well, stuff like streaming, I would say just live streaming has such a huge amount of power all of a sudden, even more I would say than like the YouTube videos, which are like completely taken over gaming's information information distribution, right? A game would come out the next day, you would find basically how-tos, tutorials on anything and everything in the game. So the need for like super detailed guides or anything like that has been taken over by YouTube videos. Although in EVE Online, being a sandbox, something like that doesn't exist, like complete playthroughs and things like that will always exist of any game, I think. But now marketing is basically really being influenced quite a lot by live streaming. And so all of this, the EVE Academy, is something that CCP is developing, but this in a situation where I think for all gaming companies, it's very difficult at the moment to get the word out there. Yeah, very, very interesting to me personally, not just from the EVE Online perspective. An interesting numbers that they gave here: 1.3 million people tried EVE Online in 2020. That's definitely a lot of players. That's definitely also a lot of players that did not stick around. So this does show that EVE Online has this higher potential if CCP can find the right, new player experience, but also giving the right incentives and things like that, right progression paths, which is not easy, of course, in a sandbox game, which is not for everyone. So they're revamping a lot of that as well. Let's see here, EVE Academy. They came out, they basically started that project coming out with videos and resource websites and things like that for people to take a look at. I'm not really sure how popular that type of stuff actually is for me personally, and that really depends from person to person. I'm someone that just, tends to watch maybe trailer, couple videos, see some good reviews, someone is having fun with the game, I just buy it, and then I actually expect everything to be available in order to play and enjoy the game within the game client itself. But as I've said, the whole landscape is changing quite drastically. That does tend to not be the case anymore. The Alliance tournament has been announced, of course, kind of a mixed reception. I personally, although I won't participate in, do look forward to that, to see what CCP is planning to organize for it. And yeah, it's not as big a high point as, for instance, a FanFest, of course, but at least it is going to be like a certain period of time where streams will be on a regular schedule, organized by the developer itself around our game. We'll see ships explosions, we'll probably see some crazy numbers when it comes to the values of some of those flagships and things like that. So for me, yeah, just bringing it on, it's going to be interesting entertainment, I think, around EVE Online, which I'll always enjoy, in my opinion. And yep, the goal, as we've said here, is just to get more players into space from CCP. The more there are, the more interactions, the more content there tends to be. And so this is their glimpse at what they're planning. Now, going through all of this, I've been going for around 20 minutes. I must say, definitely pretty low on specifics, but what can you expect for the very first communication? You won't get a full dev blog on, for instance, the mining ship rebalancing, the increased in resources, the specialized holes, all of that stuff. Can't expect that to just drop in full detail. We'd be here for hours on end if that were to happen, although, yeah, again, Path of Exile does tend to do so with their development manifestos as well, dive quite deeply into. At least we do have a little bit of an idea as to what CCP is thinking at the moment, and I would say that this one is something to look forward to. The end of scarcity in Q4 2021, with additional resources and player choices becoming available there. So CCP is going to start to turn the machine around and start to look at putting in all likeliness, the dynamic resource systems that we can then take advantage of, interact with, and hopefully again find our enjoyment into the game, which at the moment I still find it, right? I'm an explorer, solo Care Bear at heart. I can still just go out there, explore a little bit, find some good combat sites, get some rewarding loot, and then from that I just build on that with prepping for all of this. I'm doing a little bit of mining on the side, doing some trading, doing some industry if I find some cool stuff to make, and this is how I find my enjoyment in EVE Online, but that's not necessarily how everyone else enjoys playing the game. And of course, in a sandbox, trying to please everyone will never be possible. But yeah, this is CCP's July update for the game. Yeah, for me, It's still in line with what they had announced before, so there's no really big surprises or anything like that in here, but it's good to actually have a little bit of a horizon as to when we can expect some of these changes and this turnaround to happen, and it's all bound to be this year. So let's just enjoy this time, try to get ready for all of this. For me, that is going to mean a little bit of extra mining. I do still think if industry comes back, despite this announcement, that prices could go up quite substantially all of a sudden. So I'm going to make a nice big stockpile of compressed ores at this point, and I'm just going to keep enjoying my daily play sessions of EVE Online, mostly focusing on exploration, trying out the Edencom ships as I gain my skill points in there, and then participating in whatever else CCP is planning for events and things like that. I think Aldari and Amar still have to give their celebrations as well, which could be very interesting to go through as well. But yeah, there you go. That is the July status update. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.